It's Sunday night of week 2. It's the Stealing Bananas recap on the Stealing Signals YouTube. Siegel's here. I'm here. Let's do it. Welcome in to the week 2 Stealing Bananas recap show. I got to figure out an intro for this, Shawn. It's a live show, so it's got to be like a little different than our normal Stealing Bananas. I don't have that down yet, but week 2 was fun. How are you doing?
Good.
All those Brock Bowers bags feeling pretty good right now?
Well, I mean, if he stays healthy, he's going to be the overall tight end 1, right?
Yeah.
But we did get a big bounce back at the elite tight end position, especially in the guys that we were leaning toward. George Kittle with a big game. And even though it's buried by Marvin Harrison, and in part is the result of a recovery touchdown in the end zone, Trey McBride had a big game and looked unstoppable. Ben, I mean, if you had to put your money on it today, I mean, one of the things that I think can pretty easily claim or surmise after watching these first 2 weeks is the part of what happened last week with Marvin Harrison is that the Bills defense is going to be good, or at least right now they're playing awfully well. The deal on Thursday night was just sad in a lot of different ways, but even before that stuff happened, they were looking very good. If you had to bet right now, I mean, you would be leaning, I mean, maybe not, but I mean, the Saints and Cardinals look like the 2 best teams in the NFC.
The NFC. I mean, we are at the 2-minute and 30-second mark of the show. The takes are flying. No, I mean, week 2 is always super fun, Shawn. Week 1 is always fun because it's our first data point and we're all kind of trying to figure out what happens. Week 2, it's like the things we thought we knew are either true or they're not true. Obviously, there's a lot of things that can happen over 2 weeks and then still not be true. But we have a second data point now, and it's very, very exciting to start formulating these strong opinions on things. One of the things that sort of happens also is the stuff that you are more than anything, the stuff that you are right on, you wind up being like, I wish I had more of it. Like, I have a lot of exposure to Brock Bowers, mostly thanks to you, because every draft we do, you wanted to take Brock Bowers in. And I have him on a lot of teams, and I'm like, I wish I had a lot more Brock Bowers. I wish he was on every single one of my teams right now.
And on that goal line one, I was like, let him get in. They're going to score. Just let him score. Let him be the guy who gets across the goal line.
There's, he went down at the one. Alexander Madison gets to punch it in. I think he at the point he had negative rushing yardage or negative total yardage and a touchdown. I don't know if he finished with negative yardage and a TD, but he almost did the Jerome Bettis special. Remember, Jerome Bettis at one point had a 5-carry, 1-yard, 3-touchdown game way back in the day. But
there wasn't a lot of running room for Las Vegas Raiders backs.
Well, and they're also bad. But Brock Bowers is good. And what we saw today in his second career game, what we saw in week 1 in his first career game was incredible. What we saw today in the second career game, our buddy Pat Thorman, Shawn, a little bit ago during Sunday Night Football, tweeted out that he's a top 5 receiving tight end in the NFL right now. More or less, I want to get his take exactly right. Sorry. So I'm kind of hesitating to say it, but I quote tweeted it and I said, I feel like people will think this is an aggressive take, but it's actually Pat's actually being conservative here. And I think Pat knew he was being conservative because like, if you try to claim what's actually happening, you'll sound stupid.
Did he say like just tight ends? Because I mean, it hasn't been a super fast start with receivers. We can just include all the catch that he made today on a ball that was kind of by him. It didn't pop like so many other catches. There were a lot of great catches today amidst what was otherwise another pretty bleak passing effort. But he had a catch today where the ball is basically by him. He puts both hands out on it and the ball just stops, right? There was never any movement. He didn't even look like he had to do anything with his fingers. The ball just stopped. And that doesn't necessarily mean that much, but get open, catch the ball, run after the catch. The Raiders guys in camp were saying he was unstoppable. Everybody from Georgia would tell you he's unstoppable. I mean, I think that he's probably number one right now. Mm-hmm. The best young tight end in the NFL is Sam Laporta, who is just in a context where he's not going to score.
So Pat's exact tweet was Brock Bowers is already a top 5 receiving tight end. Dude shredded the Ravens today. Most impressive player on the field. I said people will think this is aggressive. And then other smarter people will recognize Pat is actually being conservative because he can't talk about what his first 2 games actually mean without sounding dumb. And then Pat's response was the best way to describe it is effortless, which is what you were just describing. And I said that's the best trade too. A rookie tight end making everything look this easy out of the jump can't be overstated. Guy's going to be in the Hall of Fame was my comment. You're saying he's number 1 tight end in the NFL. And Pat responded, no doubt, to my Hall of Fame comment. There's not enough superlatives is the point that I'm making it. And you're making. You're prone to hyperbole, especially on these Sunday night shows. I am too, obviously. But Pat is more level-headed than either of us. And that's why I'm reading this whole conversation. Shawn, when I was like saying, and the reason I read this, when I was saying sort of like you can't talk about it without sounding dumb, I wanted to say he's the best. He's the number 1, not just top 5. I wanted to say that he's going to be the tight end 1 in fantasy, at least for half of the next decades of seasons. He will be next year and at least 5 of the next 10 years. I mean, you could say all of the next 10 years, but maybe he gets hurt 1 year or something. He's just like what he did in college, which you've talked about a million times, and how good he was ball in hand and all of that stuff. Even as a runner, like all the stats are just crazy. And then what he's done in 2 games on a Raiders team with Gardner Minshew at quarterback, and he makes it look so easy, which is the best trade. It is the thing that it is so hard for rookies to do, for a young rookie, for a 3-year early declare rookie. Knocking my mic all over the place. We're excited over here.
You almost got knocked out right there. That was very aggressive.
It's what Brock Bowers has done through 2 games. I mean, somebody in the mention said, if we redrafted today, be tight end 1. I mean, yeah, when we talk about the rookie, Shawn, our emphasis last week was a little bit on how good the rookie roles were. I know in Stealing Signals, I talked about it. We talked about it on the Stealing Bananas episode later in the week, that the rookie roles were so strong in week 1. And that's the stuff that you should be looking for in week 1, not just like somebody getting a big workload, like a veteran running back getting a big workload or something, but the things that are going to evolve positively over the season versus the things that are going to evolve maybe, negatively, like a veteran getting a huge workload may actually work backwards over the season. We saw in week 2 all of that hit immediately, right? Like we're talking about Bowers. Malik Neighbors gets 18 targets and has just a monster game in the matchup that you expect him to have a big game in, because the Commander secondary is terrible, but he goes out and does it. He has a bad drop late, but an incredible game otherwise. Marvin Harrison Jr. was the wide receiver 1. By the end of the first quarter in his game, there was 11 completed games. By the end of the first quarter of his game, he was a wide receiver 1 on the week. He had outscored every other player in the 11 completed games. He obviously goes out and does these incredible things. Like, the trajectory is from here. I mean, obviously they can't improve on massive numbers. Like, it's not like Malik Neighbors had 18 targets and I'm saying he's going to have 25 a game going forward. Like, that can't happen. But when you do this in the first 2 games as a rookie, the back-weighted stuff is what it is for a reason. You still have like ways that you can be incorporated more in the pass game as things go on, or in the offense as things go on. They're this heavily being featured right away. That's just rocket ships for this season, for their whole careers.
It'll be fun to track. Obviously, the receivers didn't have a fantastic week 1, and then I haven't had a chance to watch Giants Commanders yet, but that gets me fired up for it. I think there was one generational prospect in this draft, and it was very clearly Brock Bowers, and it's fun to see him get started. I guess I would be a little bit nervous for Harrison, just from a volume perspective, in the same way I'm a little bit nervous for McBride. One of the things that we talked a lot about in relation to where we were drafting, especially McBride, and the fact that if you have those 2 guys, it's going to be very difficult to contain them both. So in this case, Marvin Harrison and Trey McBride, hard for defenses to take both away. One of the issues is that opposing defenses have not been able to take James Conner away, and the Cardinals defense has looked pretty good. Now, a lot of things went wrong for the Rams today, and it sort of snowballed on them very quickly. Even though the Rams, I think, are a well above average team, or would be on most Sundays, the Cardinals are going to have a lot of games that are more competitive than this. The Harrison situation is interesting because it was both exciting and kind of fluky in that the first touchdown was very similar to the thing with Bowers, where if not for the fact that the ball never really moved from the fingers at all, it would have been ruled incomplete because he didn't really have it when he had his feet down. But there was just never any time during the rest of the process where you saw even the slightest movement, or they would have ruled it incomplete.
Well, they didn't even look at it. I had an interesting take on Twitter today because Breece Hall's 50-50 ball that he brought down. Did you see that game? You did. Okay. You sent me a list of games. Sometimes I have a bad habit of talking about the games that Shawn
Well, I mean, if Blake Neighbors had 18 targets, that's one of the. I was excited for 16 for JSN, and you're like, that's nothing. That's nothing.
Yeah, well, most of the games that you wrote me, nothing happened, and I was like, oh, great. There's nothing to talk about in those games. But I did miss in the Washington Giants game that obviously Neighbors played in that game. But the other ones are Carolina and the Chargers, Pittsburgh and Denver, Cleveland and Jacksonville. We don't have a ton to talk about from those games, not to ruin them. But
I did see on the bottom line, Quentin Johnston was available in my Guillotine League, and I picked him up and played him. And I think that I think I was going to advance, but that's kind of fun. Anybody who had a bad week today, get out there and play some Guillotine Leagues. You can do those at the start of any season. Ben, what was the Marvin Harrison take? What were your thoughts on these two? You're bringing up Breece Hall kind of out of nowhere. Oh. He had an amazing catch as well.
He had a 50-50 catch, but when he went down, the ball jostled a little. I do think he kept his hands under the ball, but it was very clear that it moved, and they didn't go to a longer review. They just confirmed it. And then a little later in that same game, Calvin Ridley made a nice play on a deep throw, really nice play, but was pretty clearly touched.
Catch. Was clearly down. I don't like that rule. I don't think that if you don't actually have the ball, that and again, it comes down to like very small things. I think that should be a touchdown, but that's not what the rule is. I mean, how can you miss that?
And then they were kind of talking like that. Like I didn't understand the rule because I thought it was what you're saying, that if if he touches him before he possesses the ball, it still is contact down. They were talking about it like it wasn't until the moment that he possessed the ball. But even having said that, they went back to that. You were probably watching fast forwarded. They went back to that after the commercial with Sterator, and their legs touched
down, right?
Yeah, well, their legs touched after he caught the ball. Even after he had it and was clearly on the ground, they did a still frame. They're like their legs touched, and they were like that was another one where it was very close in real time, but they always stop it and look at that on a scoring play, but they didn't there. And so that was the same thing as the Harrison one, where it was like we got a couple looks at it. They always stop that. I mean, I wrote on Twitter 80% of the time or more. They stop that and they take a long time to look at it. I think the league was kind of making an effort because I think behind closed doors admitted, there was a report that they admitted that last week the Gesicki touchdown from Burrow should not have been overturned, admitted it to the Bengals. And I think this week it was like, we're not even going to look at this stuff anymore. We're just going to confirm it and just move on. I honest to God think they're like, we don't have enough scoring as it is. We're not going to nitpick little jostles of the ball. If no one can see it, we're just going to move on, and no one cares anyway. I mean, no one's going to complain about points. We want points.
Yeah. If we're going to default to the new basic rule of thumb is don't take points off the board, I'm all for that.
Yeah, we're all for it. But that's what I think happened with the Harrison thing. You were saying it was a great play. I think it was too. I would have been intrigued to see some of the slow-mos and just, I mean, I'm not 100% sure that he caught that, but.
Well, then the next one, almost anybody is going to be down, but he managed to keep his entire body up on the full stretch until he crossed the goal line. I was sure he was going to be down there. That was fantastic. There wasn't
on that
a ton.
Replay, Tiki Barber swore. I think he's in the middle of talking. Well, oh no, he said he's in the middle of talking and he goes, Jesus. And then he like caught himself. He's like, I don't think I can say that.
Yeah, you just got to go right into the Jiminy Christmas. That was amazing. There wasn't a lot of volume after that, but there were two different end zone targets where he was one-on-one and decent throws on either of them. And we're talking about 4 touchdowns. Kyler Murray is not a good passer. The offense is going to be electric. They're going to score a ton of points. He missed both of those throws badly. Or we're talking about Marvin Harrison with 4 touchdowns. The problem is just that outside of the touchdowns, the volume is not going to consistently be there. Or there's a very real risk of that.
Yeah. He only had the 4 catches all day, right? He caught. So, yeah, his first quarter, which pushed him into the overall wide receiver 1 for the week, he didn't catch a pass in the next 3 quarters, which is unfortunate, obviously. Not great. But he still put up 130 yards and 2 touchdowns in that 1 quarter. So a fantastic game for him. I do think it's a great point that volume is going to be a problem. I was pleased with McBride. I saw some comments on him when we were talking about Bowers. McBride, even in a game where the Cardinals immediately pull ahead, they get the 2 long touchdowns. Harrison goes nuclear, and the big plays are going to take pass volume off the board. Kyler throws 21 passes in this game total. And at the point where he had only thrown like 13 or 14, McBride had like 5 or 6 catches already. They were throwing him some tight end screens. He makes a really nice play on a play action where Kyler kind of drops one in on the sideline between 2 defenders. And he goes up and wins a contested catch. Really
double cover.
Play.
And he goes up like it's sort of that Godzilla thing where, I mean, he's walled off by the defense and the sideline, and then he's up and his hands are gigantic and he's pulling the ball in. And you're like, oh, well, no one else had a chance at that one.
Yeah, I mean, a fantastic game, 6-6, 67, I think, relative to the situation, a fantastic game because they win by 31 and they're winning huge early in this game. Mr. TD says no JSN talk yet. I asked Shawn before we jumped on any, quick thoughts before we go live. He said, well, I figure we're just going to talk about Bowers and JSN the whole time. I was ready to start with Bowers, but he had JSN right there with Bowers. So, Shawn, why don't we talk about JSN for a moment?
I mean, this may have been the biggest exhale and moment of relief that I've experienced with the fantasy football in a long time, because I mean, you always have plays that you really like and that you've invested a lot of words on, but also you're heavily invested yourself in your teams, and your subscribers and your listeners are, maybe they're not as heavily invested because they're like, Shawn is a crazy person on this. I'm going to dial it down from that level. And then you have week 1. And I mean, that was really disconcerting. You were talking about Ryan Grubb and the all caps messages back to Washington. And I was like, maybe it's them. Maybe it's not Shane Waldron. Then we got today and you see the 16 targets, the 12 catches. He had another reception for 11, 12 yards. It was called back on a penalty. The 12 receptions should have been 13. He does get open down the field. That's good to hear. He gets open down the field on one, and there was one where he had to then turn his orientation body back to the QB and dropped it. And that was pretty frustrating because it hurt the team in addition to knocking down his fantasy numbers very easily. If he catches that, I mean, obviously everything is different then from that point on, but you think about the type of game he had, it could have been 14 catches. Every week is not going to be like that, but there were also a huge number of targets to DK Metcalf, very effective targets. Obviously Metcalf gets open early for the 50, I believe it was 6-yard touchdown. There wasn't a lot of Tyler Lockett. Tyler Lockett's going to be involved some, still a good player. Sometimes the opposing defense is going to scheme it up so that more targets come in his direction. But one of the things that you really like to see is that when you have this kind of a 1-2 punch, that both guys can thrive, in part because they feed off of each other, and whatever the defense takes away on a certain play, you can get the other thing. And, there are still times out there where if you're hoping that JSN is going to look like the next Amon-Ra St. Brown, maybe you're a little bit disappointed, but this was a fantastic game today, helping the team win. A really nice performance against the Patriots. They win there at the end. And the contrast, I think, between that and what Caleb Williams had to deal with. I mean, Williams is making some mistakes. The young quarterbacks, and I would include Anthony Richardson in there. I mean, today you see what happens when Richardson doesn't hit on the deep passes, and he basically looks like he hasn't played before, and the team is bad, right? I haven't had a chance to, I think a little bit defensively as I worked through the day, I pushed off the Denver Broncos game to tomorrow because my thought was that that's a terrible week 2 matchup for them against the Steelers. And judging by the final score, it was
everybody
bad.
On Twitter wants everyone who liked Bo Nix to admit that he's a bust after 2 games on the road against Mike McDonald and at home against the Steelers. Like, you have to come out and say publicly that you were wrong and Bo Nix is a bust. Because rookie quarterback
does everybody who likes
struggled.
Caleb Wilson have to say that? Everybody who likes Anthony Richardson have to say that?
Yeah,
I mean, maybe after I watch the game, I will say it because I mean, 6 points is not enough, right? Yeah. You have to play better.
Yeah, it's not a fun game. I want to riff off your Seahawks comment because I think it's a good note about the Harrison McBride thing. It's kind of the point I was trying to make on McBride, working off of Harrison, hitting efficiently and for big plays down the field early. They go for 8 and 6 targets in a game with only 21 pass attempts. The rest of the team combined has 7 targets. No one else had more than 2 individually. Wilson and Dortch each have 2. But we see the Harrison McBride thing where they're the core of the team. And then your comments on the Seahawks. This is what we were hoping for from Ryan Grubb. It was the most exciting thing for me today because it was one of the more disappointing things in week 1, and it didn't flip. You just brought up Caleb Williams. The Shane Waldron thing's not going to flip because we've seen Shane Waldron. We haven't seen Ryan Grubb before. And, I mean, the Waldron thing could flip, but I thought it was bad again tonight, and it's frustrating. The
Houston
Grubb
has
thing
a fantastic defense.
They do. So we'll see.
It could be that both the Titans and the Texans are well above average defensively, and that when the Bears get into some better matchups, they will look better. But, I mean, you've got to get your playmakers involved. If Odunze is that. Now, he came into the game injured. I do think that they missed Keenan Allen pretty badly.
Yeah.
One of their issues is they have no running game either, and it's not schemed in such a way that it's going to possibly work. And so then everything falls back on Williams. But the point here is that the Seahawks look fantastic in a game where, I mean, one of the things we've talked about and gone back and forth with a little bit is how much does it help that Zach Charbonnet really profiles as a high-value touchback, and he does get a touchdown today. He's got soft hands. We saw the receiving touchdown last week. The contrast between that, or the tension between that, and the fact that, like, he doesn't have any spark to him.
Right.
And so
that's
the
where I was
difference
going to
between,
go with it.
Yeah, I mean, not having Kenneth Walker today, you're going to have to throw, and they did.
I circled back to make a really sharp point, but you just went ahead and made it, so I'm disappointed now. No, I was going to say that I was worried about Grubb after last week, but I think the fact that Kenneth Walker was not in the lineup today was really notable because Walker, last week they were really interested in establishing the run and all those things, and Walker was the one thing that really worked for them last week, and I think they got a little bit too into that. It's interesting to see this week without Walker in there and with Charbonnet, who rushes 14 times for 38 yards and was really inefficient in week 1 as well. He had the one wheel route TD broken play that was for 30 yards, and I think his other 9 touches went for 11 yards last week. And this week he goes 14 for 38 on the ground, 5 for 31 receiving. It's fine. It works. It's great for PPR fantasy. He gets the high-value touches, like you said. He gets the short touchdown. He catches 5 passes. It's a nice day. But it's one of those days where they're like, this is not going to be the focal point of our offense, and they showed that they can make the focal point, getting it to the guys they wanted. And what we've talked about with Grubb is this idea of being able to scheme the routes out there so that the throws are there for Geno, so he doesn't necessarily have to go through the progressions, so that they're kind of getting the dudes open that they want to get open. That's what you see in the target concentration that you were talking about, and that the two guys working off each other. 16 targets for JSN, 14 for Metcalf, 44 total passes. 30 of them are targeted to those two guys. You have Charbonnet getting 5, which are basically checkdowns. And then Fant gets 3, Lockett 2, Bobo 2, Visca Chenault 1. The whole rest of the team has 13, and you have 16 for JSN and 14 for DK Metcalf. It's that's scheme right there. And so like you were saying, maybe with Waldron, maybe the defenses are good and everything. My concern is when Caleb drops back, look, like I understand he's a rookie. Maybe Caleb sucks, whatever. Like people want to put it all on him. We can't see it from the broadcast angle, but I feel pretty confident when I see a quarterback drop back. And I know the offensive line's an issue, but you're not getting them easy throws. There's a lot of these schemes where the easy throws are there on time, in rhythm, before the pressure gets to the quarterback. To me, every drop back, he looks confused, but he's also like, when the throws are there, I feel like he is poised in taking them. I'm probably biased, but the way that I'm watching Caleb Williams, I'm like, these route combinations have to suck downfield. I mean, maybe I need to do some all 22 watching to try to support that or something, which I don't usually go dive into it, but it seems very clear to me that the amount of time that he's standing there holding the ball, that the route combinations are not doing what Ryan Grubbs were able to do for Geno Smith today, where you can get the ball to where it's intended to go with some regularity. Not every snap, because the defense is they're trying to stop you, but with some regularity.
And it was just the exact same thing that we saw last year with JSN, where Adunze never open and not seemingly even of interest to them. I mean, you have a game where Keenan Allen is out. Now, he did have not exactly a drop, but a tough end zone catch that he doesn't make. I mean, otherwise, again, just not involved at all. And I mean, Ben, it was so different watching the Seahawks today, where every single play, Geno drops back, he throws it to JSN, and he's just wide open on most of them, right? They weren't even difficult plays. Whereas last year, number one, he wouldn't ever read that way. And then number two, half the routes were jogging over to the defender and standing. I don't know for sure that's what Adunze was doing tonight, but you get those really gross echoes. DJ Moore, on the other hand, was making heroic efforts and routes over and over, and a lot of the passes just weren't where he needed them to be. But again, why make it that hard on your players?
But even the one that he got mad about late, it's a back shoulder play, and yes, Caleb throws a bad ball on it, but also, how many times have we talked, Shawn, over the years about, like, if the play design is just a one-on-one to the boundary, it's the hardest throw, like the downfield boundary throws. Like, you used to talk about Derek Carr and Amari Cooper with the Raiders. Like, the whole offense was like, we're going to turn the sideline into another defender and make this as hard as possible. Like, where's the bunch route? Like, one of the takes that I got wrong in week one was I called it Calvin Ridley's huge volume noise. And in part because I was like, Will Levis is bad enough that this is probably going to be a little bit noisy volume. People are going to talk up the unrealized air yards every week. But in week two, we actually saw that kind of hit in a meaningful way, in part because
of a great catch.
That one, but also there's some plays like
he had a
down
deep drop as well, which is a problem for Calvin Ridley. He doesn't catch that ball because he's able to get open for it. Once you get open for it, your quarterback really needs you to make that play.
For sure. It's not all perfect, and I don't think Calvin Ridley is going to be like a huge smash that I'm worried about not having. But I do think the volume manifested in we're building our pass offense around this guy way, and he had a good game because of it. But there was a key third down that I put in my notes I'm going to write about in Signals, where they did a bunch formation, one of those three with a guy on the point and the two receivers behind it. He's on the outside. He runs a drag route from the outside, formation. The other two guys go vertical, and it allows him to get that easy separation, right? Like the outside in drag route. And Levis can make, that's an easy throw for Levis to make. Any quarterback can make that. It's a 3rd and 5 drag route, smart coaching, easy throw from a bunch formation. He catches it and has room to run. That's good coaching, like showing a different formational alignment and that kind of stuff. That's one of the things you don't really see from Waldron. Like when you watch the Bears, they're lined up in the same like pro style offense that every freaking team lines up in, right? Like when are they doing a varied formation, making the DBs have to communicate as the routes develop out of a bunch formation? They just maybe they do it some, I don't know.
But even beyond some of that stuff, we haven't gotten a signature play yet where Adunze was able to show the athleticism that he very clearly has. I mean, all those things, if you have him or if you have Caleb Williams, if you're a Chicago Bears fan, those things are frustrating. I think partly what we saw at the end too with DJ Moore is just this feeling of like, I mean, not that he hadn't had decent seasons before. That's how we've known that he's one of the best receivers in the NFL. But he's like, I broke out last year with Justin Fields. And
Tyson,
and now I'm going to take a step back.
Yeah.
It's like,
frustrating.
How did I lose Justin Fields and now I'm going to take a step back?
Right. I mean, the worst ultimately probably the worst quarterback for wide receiver production because he's going to run so much, he's going to take sacks, all those things. But yeah, the point about the Tennessee thing is just like, if you're going to be giving these layups and Will Levis is able to take these layups, like just to the people that are thinking that Caleb Williams has looked really bad, I'm confident Caleb Williams could take those layups too. It's just unfortunate that, I mean, we talked about it last week. I think we called for those guys to get fired last Sunday. So, I mean, it's early in the season. We could maybe let some things develop. But I'm confident if those types of throws were there, that Caleb Williams could see a shallow crosser that's open. And you have DJ Moore for that route, right? Like, you have a Dunze for that route. You're talking about using his athleticism. I think the scheme stuff, Sean, we talk about it constantly. It feels like we emphasize it all the time. And I feel like it's still not getting emphasized enough. Like, look at the Saints, man. Look what they were able to do today.
Has there been a difference between, I believe it was Pete Carmichael and Clint Kubiak?
There's been a minor difference. Things look a little different. Suddenly Derek Carr is running the most interesting offense in the NFL. And if you can get Derek Carr to do that, like, I'm not, dogging your guy, Derek Carr, Sean, but
on a long enough timeline, my Derek Carr enthusiasm will finally pay off.
If you could get the most fun offense in the league when Derek Carr is your QB, or Kevin O'Connell is doing it with Sam Darnold, like, you can't tell me scheme doesn't matter. Baker Mayfield is doing it right now. Like, these guys that have failed at other places, I don't know. It's just, why do guys like Shane Waldron get jobs? That's what I want to know.
It was a fast start for Baker Mayfield again today. The Lions did then more or less completely shut them down for most of that game and still managed to not come out on top. So, other
than Baker running QB draws in the 2-minute drill, which was, they showed a montage of Barry Sanders because they're playing in Detroit, and then Baker Mayfield's QB draws today. And I'm like, didn't expect this comparison today.
Baker Mayfield is one of those folks where I don't think everybody who gets to interact with him is going to like him, but not that I have any idea, obviously, but he's feisty. And you can see the feistiness on some of those plays. You like that competitiveness. I mean, would you like him to be bigger and stronger armed and more accurate and just a better NFL quarterback? You'd love all of those things. But if you can't get that, and very clearly all the teams can't, you'll take somebody who makes the throws that are there. I mean, they got Chris Godwin wide open constantly early in that game. And then, once it was all shut down, he competed and got the victory. There are a couple teams now in the NFC South that you could claim are vaguely interesting. Hopefully we'll get the Falcons eventually added to that group. But
to that Baker note, did you notice after his rushing TD that he went through each of his offensive teammates and gave them all a headbutt in the end zone? That was his celebration. He started headbutting linemen. He started headbutting his receivers. I'm like, dude, this is like, you gave yourself 11 micro concussions. Can we just not headbutt everyone 11 times in a row?
He's going to compete.
He's going to compete. It's yeah. What else you got? I know you got more takes. I want to hear them. The people have heard me. They've seen me tweeting everything all day. What do you got?
I'm interested to hear about some of these tweets. I did think it was fun if we're thinking about players who flashed in week one and it's maybe still a little bit thin in terms of what they have done for their careers. You want them to come back and look good. And Jameson Williams looked good again. He looks extremely fast. It was great to see Jared Goff not actually miss him when he got open deep early, because that was one of the problems that they had early in his career, is that on the handful of times that he played and then got open, Goff would miss him. Goff drops that pass in early. That was fantastic. It was one of the few decent plays for Goff today, who really struggled, had a bad game and more or less caught them the victory. But it was great to see it happen in a game where Amon-Ra came back and was a big target element as well. Now, there are going to be some games where Sam Laporta also jumps up and just does what Sam Laporta can do. You could argue that should have been today. I mean, they really needed it.
55 pass attempts, 3 targets for Laporta.
Yeah, that's a flaw in some of the things that they're doing. I know that he has been relatively effective, but every time that David Montgomery is on the field, it's a missed opportunity for the Lions. Jahmyr Gibbs today just looked absolutely unreal. I mean, you think back to the number of plays they made against Baker Mayfield and the number of individual splash plays that they had on offense, and you're trying to figure out how this game was even close, much less a Lions loss. But one of the things that doesn't necessarily show up or isn't going to show up until people really dig into the numbers is that in addition to the solid day that he had overall, is that Jameson had 2 end zone targets. Now, neither one of them worked out. But when you're talking about the overall volume for someone who is rising and can get open pretty easily, beyond the big strike early and the fact that he was involved again, despite the fact that I don't think that he practiced very much this week, he certainly was limited with that injury he suffered in week 1. He didn't look injured today, which is always good. I mean, one of the things that we not figured out, but was very obvious on Thursday night is that, Achane was either not injured or had one of those epic performances where you play even better injured than you do healthy. There were a lot of our guys that we really are just very high on, and the season for us in many ways will come down to what they do, who were either just out, like a Kenneth Walker, somebody who kind of fits that, kind of doesn't, in a Keenan Allen who was out, but then also plenty of guys like a Jameson Williams and a Jaden Reed, where, Reed's main issue obviously was going to be the quarterback in the game plan, but he had multiple things that they had listed on the injury report. He looked electric on the couple little times that he was able to touch the ball in that game. Just knowing the guys are probably okay is also a big deal.
53 rushes against 14 passes for the Packers today. Jacobs runs 32 times. Reed does get 2 carries, 22 yards and 15 yards, goes for 37 rushing yards, catches 2 balls for 9 yards in a 12 for 14 passing day from Malik Willis. So it's just nothing there, obviously. Dontavian Wicks gets a TD. It's already tough when they do spread it around a little bit there. It's obviously a lot tougher when there's only 14 pass attempts total.
The Colts may have the worst rushing defense in NFL history.
In NFL history. I thought you were going to say the league, but I like when we go to NFL history. That's a good idea.
Think about what they've given up in these first 2 weeks.
It's not great. And obviously week 1 was the Joe Mixon 160 yards without, as you wrote in week 1, we talked about bananas, without like evading a single tackle. The Bucs, I was going to say, might have a better defense than we're expecting. I think they made Goff's life tough today. And I thought they did a good job against the Commanders last week. The Commanders ended up getting a couple late touchdowns, but they were pretty much shut out for like 3 full quarters in that game. I had been hoping for more out of the Commanders last week. I took them as a week 1 money line underdog bet that, hey, maybe Jane Daniels comes out and plays at a rookie of the year level right out of the gate. He didn't play bad or anything, but I do think the Bucs defense might. Todd Bowles is a good defensive coach. I think the Bucs might be a good team as well. That's another team level take that we kind of blew past when you're talking about Goff struggling today. It might not be just Goff and the Lions that were the problem today.
Yeah, I'm excited for the Mayfield Derek Carr combo there. That's always a fun one late in those best ball drafts where you're like, I really don't want to, but maybe. And what we've seen in the first couple of weeks, obviously Carr hit Shaheed a second time. You had a fantastic catch by Olave today where, unfortunately, if you're hoping for a different kind of score, he goes down at the 6-inch line. I kept thinking, just bring us all these replays. Show us one where that catch is across the goal line. It wasn't there. The flip side of that is that you weren't really thinking that this is going to be one of those games where the Cowboys defense has a little bit of a bad matchup and gets embarrassed, but it definitely was, right? So you have the Cowboys where, they're able to really beat up on bad teams, but at this point are almost completely uncompetitive against well above average teams. They were today. Obviously, you got the not really broken coverage, but on a double team there with CeeDee Lamb, the ball gets through, the defenders kind of surprise each other. He's able to run the rest of the way. If you have some Lamb, it was too bad that Prescott again missed him for another meaningful touchdown in this one. Prescott, another one of these guys where, and one of the things we want to remember for the rookies when we're thinking about Caleb Williams and how bad he looked, someone who isn't a rookie, but hasn't been able to get very many NFL reps, which I think in fairness, we have to keep in mind. But someone like Anthony Richardson and how bad he looked. I mean, Dak Prescott looked like someone who hadn't played a lot of NFL football today. And we know that he is, probably a top 10 reality quarterback in the NFL. We did get some Jalen Tolbert action, although again, there's a garbage time element to it all.
He makes a really nice hustle play on a fumble, not quite in garbage time yet, to come back and recover a fumble after he had made a nice catch on the drive, sets him up for a field goal that cuts it to whatever, like 13 points at that point, and then the Saints just kept scoring, so it didn't really matter. But he had a little stretch there where you're like, okay, well, Jalen Tolbert's like being a contributing member of the offense. That's good. And Rico Dowdle today, I mean, they started him. They used him early. They used a Deuce Vaughn, Cavante Turpin dual backfield flanking Dak on a couple plays early before I saw Zeke at all. They used Zeke a little bit after that. They started using Zeke quite a bit more, but seemed to be indicating that they recognize that Ezekiel Elliott's probably not a huge asset. Although what's weird is that it's like the opposite of what I would have expected. I would have thought they would have gave him some deference early and then maybe minimize his overall usage. Instead, they embarrassed him by not using him and making it obvious. They're showing camera shots of him on the sideline like they haven't put in Ezekiel Elliott yet, but then they still actually used him a decent
I was wondering
amount.
if he was one of these guys who had sort of stealth, got injured in warm-up. I mean, sometimes it's just very clear, like with Evan Ingram. The thing that was weird about the Dowdle deal is that they weren't trying to make it look like Dowdle was really the starter either, because as you mentioned, they were using a lot of Deuce Vaughn. One of the things that I had mentioned to you a couple times.
Who is a middle schooler? He's the size of a middle schooler. I don't know.
Deuce Vaughn is easily, among people who weren't washed 4 years ago and are on the Cowboys active roster, Deuce Vaughn is the one who has most recently been good at football. Right?
Okay. But also is these, if we're going to do superlatives, is the smallest looking football player in NFL history. He looks smaller than Darren Sproles. Like, he makes Darren Sproles look big.
He's little, and you never love to see it when the guys make a good move, beat somebody, they have some space, someone else comes walking over from behind, and as opposed to tackling him, they just kind of lift him off the ground, and they're like, "It's okay, we'll put you in timeout." No, it's not great when you're that size. It does make it a little more challenging. The thing that I had mentioned to you a couple times when we were talking about Dowdle is that his tested athleticism is good, and the fact that he's never had production, maybe there, is some contextual element to that. But he didn't look explosive when he had chances today. And I don't like to emphasize this because I wish it weren't a part of the evaluation. But one of the things that they have talked a lot about is with Elliott, they trust him on the pass protection. It wasn't going to make a difference in this game. I mean, they were going to get annihilated one way or the other. But he did get blown up pretty significantly on a pass blocking rep somewhat early in the game. He seemed
Elliott
like they did
Dowdle.
And they didn't change the rotation after that. So I'm guessing it didn't have a big part. I mean, one of the things with a lot of these veterans who haven't had great metrics, but are in offenses that are using them much more effectively this season and have been productive early is, I just really want to see Dalvin Cook out there. They have talked about him needing some more practice, probably a couple more weeks. So you probably are going to have to wait, but there's a decent chance that he completely changes their offense. There's also a decent chance that he never plays a snap for him this year. So that's also something I'm trying to keep in the back of my mind.
You mentioned the defense getting blown up. Derek Carr, 11 for 16 for 243 yards. Is 22 yards per completion good? Is 15.2 yards per attempt good?
I thought we were going to get 6 touchdowns from Alvin Kamara today.
Yeah, it's way too easy.
I think in retrospect, they may have regretted giving Carr that sneak, because at the end of the game, you're like, why? So Kenry Miller, obviously not eligible right now, and I think they would prefer for him never to show up on their sidelines.
Right.
Jamal Williams completely and totally done. And yet,
although he'll get real excited when the game's out of hand and he gets some carries. He's talking a lot of crap. It was great.
But late in deep into garbage time, Alvin Kamara is still playing. And I'm like, this makes absolutely no sense to me. And then I realized, well, when they weren't anywhere close to the end zone, it didn't make any sense. But when they got down there and they're very clearly trying to get him a 5th touchdown, that made me really happy. When teams are enthusiastic about their players having historic days and lean into it and try and get them more, that just makes me love the coordinator, the head coach, the entire organization. It was, I mean, unfortunately they committed a penalty, if I'm remembering correctly, and they got themselves like way back out of where it would have worked. But I mean, they were going to try and get him a 5th touchdown.
He does have the 1-6 touchdown game to his career, and yeah, maybe they were going for the 6. Again, Shawn, I had a real question for you about that. So after the opening, or maybe even before the opening Saquon Barkley game, we've talked a lot about the different peripherals for running backs, missed tackles, force, yards after contact per attempt are 2 big ones. The evasion stuff tends to isolate player skill. One of the Stealing Signals subscribers wrote that, it's a lot more difficult to get those numbers in a really bad offense like the Giants. This was like a pro Barkley argument that getting out in space and some of those things, and you're doing a little bit more of the evading stuff and yards after contact stuff against DBs as opposed to linemen might matter. I mean, I don't know to what extent I actually buy that, but I do think it's interesting that Barkley in this new offense looked really good in the first game. We obviously haven't seen him in week 2 yet. That might have some validity to it, that like the declining peripherals might have been more offensive focused in that one situation. Kamara's another one where when I think back to like, okay, I was pretty out on him. He looks so good in this new offense. His peripherals were really, really bad, and particularly cratered last year when things got really bad in that offense. But they've been down since his peak. Like 2020 is his last like strong year. In 2021, 22, they were down. And then in 2023, they fell meaningfully further from 21 and 22, which were down from the 2017 to 2020 peak. Do you think there's something to this? Because I kind of think watching him that his peripherals are going to rebound in 2024, that he's going to post better numbers in some of this stuff. He basically is always running free.
Yeah.
Or is it just 2 weeks?
Well, I think there are a combination of things happening, which is that I really do believe that, I mean, the offensive coordinators just make such a massive difference. And, someone from that Kubiak tree, I mean, so many of the massive seasons come from those guys. It was one of the reasons that I wrote up Kendre Miller as someone who could be, again, apples and oranges in a lot of ways, but could be this year's Kyron Williams, in that you're behind someone who could be done, and the offense is going to be completely different and blow up, right? So what we've seen is that it can be the starter as opposed to the understudy who probably is more dynamic. The long touchdown reception today is almost entirely just the scheme. There was no one around him. And in many of the plays today where he looked good, there was no one around him. And I mean, someone like Alvin Kamara is going to be fine in that circumstance. One of the touchdowns there, though, when he kind of gets knocked to the side and he has to work his way through that gap that opens, where you need to be able to have the vision to see it. You need to have the explosiveness to get through it. You need to maintain your balance through contact so you just didn't go down. And then he's able to get through it and explode to score. I mean, that's a play where you're like, I mean, that is well above average.
He's a good football player. Yeah.
And so if you can add that on, well, but again, I think that we have to balance what we know from the past several years with what we've seen. But I think the offense is going to score a lot of points. Now, you still have Derek Carr. There are still questions about that. I like Derek Carr. Chris Olave has been good, not unbelievable. The long scores that they've gotten are pretty fluky. Do they have enough overall talent to keep defenses off of Kamara? And one of the things that we got right away, and before the injury, because I do believe that Joe Mixon was injured in tonight's game, but
he did come back for one snap, which was kind of weird, but he came back for one play.
So you get this dynamic where you see Joe Mixon against a real NFL defense, and it's obvious that it's not really that he's just a guy, it's that he should be a backup. I don't think that we're going to get that from Alvin Kamara, but when you think about players like a Saquon Barkley and an Alvin Kamara, where you have multiple seasons worth of poor peripherals, I don't think that we can immediately ignore that. But one of the things in terms of writing about Barkley that was important, and I think people miss, is that the big strike ability matters. Now, the game today from Jonathan Taylor was not one of those games like the game last week from Barkley, certainly not like the game today from Kamara. But the contrast between week 1, where you're playing a well above average rushing defense, and then week 2, where you're playing a really poor rushing defense, was dramatic. And so you can see, okay, in this situation, I'm going to look better. I'm going to look dynamic. The fact that I can wait for the blocks, and there were some really cool replays of Taylor today, letting his blocking develop and then exploding through the hole. And so you have some of these guys with the long speed. If you're into an offensive context that's going to play that up, which I think that after 1 week already, I think we can make that claim about Barkley, you're going to see big plays and plays that when we think about it from an EP perspective, so the expected points and then the fantasy points over expectation, I mean, Kamara is somebody who was extraordinary for a long time, extraordinary with Sean Payton and Drew Brees, and then really poor with the guys in between then and then what we've seen for the first couple of weeks. I think the fantasy points over expected are going to be there for both Barkley and for Kamara. And from a fantasy perspective, that's what you care about. I don't know that the peripherals are going to necessarily rebound quite to the level that people think. Because as we mentioned on the midweek show last week, there were some guys who had superficially good performances in week 1 when the other numbers will tell you something different. And one of the things, obviously Next Gen has the yards over expected. You can learn some interesting things from that. Sports Info Solutions, which I focus on in the Zero RB universe that comes out midweek, has just an insane number of different types of ways that you can look at the running back performance. But then they also have the combination of that in terms of points above average, which are going to take into consideration the game context, your own blockers, the opposing defense, how they are playing you. And guys who are in much better offensive situations are going to score better, even if their reality performance was simply okay. I mean, I don't think there's that much question that Alvin Kamara at this point is going to have a huge year unless he gets hurt or someone else important in the offense gets hurt.
Yeah, it does seem very, very likely. If you're watching the stream, like it and subscribe to the channel. We'll be doing this every Sunday night. Show us some love. You mentioned Olave looked good, not great necessarily. I was just looking at it and kind of laughing. I mean, the 16 pass attempts is so funny. 6 targets, 4 catches, 81 yards. It's actually a 37.5% target share.
Good, not great, Ben.
What's that?
Good, not great.
Good, not great. Well, I mean, it's not. It is very clearly good, not great. But it's one of those things where because they got up to such a massive lead early, you mentioned the big plays. Shaheed has a 70-yard TD, has 3 other catches for 26 yards. Kamara
Can we
has
get
a
what
50.
Shaheed is pacing for?
Yeah, just ridiculous
2,000
numbers.
yards and 20 touchdowns.
Well, I mean, I think it's mostly just the 2 long touchdowns. So I don't even know that he's probably pacing for that much because it's just like it's 1 60-yard touchdown per week is what he's pacing for, and that's good. Kamara has a 50
the ball as a rusher a little bit too, which I think
they did.
subtly adds to both his floor and his ceiling.
Yeah, he gets 3 carries for 13 yards. Kamara 57-yard TD reception on a screenplay that just like he just kind of crosses across the field as if there's no defense. I mean, it looked like it was a training camp video. He had 8 other receiving yards. My point in kind of going through it is there's only one other catch between Shaheed, Kamara, and Olave. Taysom Hill had a 1-yard reception. Only one other target to anyone other than those 3, and Hill, their fullback Adam Prentice, had 1 target. Again, very low volume game. If you have Chris Olave, I think you still have to be really excited about what this offense has been through 2 weeks and what it's going to mean, as you were talking about, when the offense isn't quite as efficient and everything isn't as perfect. Olave is still going to be a figurehead of this offense. The play you mentioned that they kept showing the highlight on It was a motion and a play action, and they get him into that what Corain has dubbed the splash zone, that deep middle on a deep over route, and he's running wide open. And it just highlighted all of the easy buttons. We're doing motion, we're doing play action, and we're throwing our main guy that we want to get the ball to as like a first read into the efficient part of the field, and he's wide open because of all that. He catches it and runs. Disappointing that he didn't quite get in, like you said. It ends up being a short touchdown run for Alvin Kamara instead. But it was a big play, 39-yard reception for him. It was his big play of the day. I think Olave is going to be fine. I think he's going to be totally, totally fine. Week 1, he was pulled back a little bit by efficiency from other guys, including Shaheed. Week 2, sort of the same story. They blow out the Cowboys. They are going to have some pushback at some point in their season. Shawn, I want to talk to you about the Jets a little bit. I can't stay too late today. It is my daughter's birthday tomorrow. I got a busy day tomorrow with Stealing Signals and her birthday.
It sounds like you got about 40 hours worth of stuff to do.
I literally do. The thing we do on the birthdays for both the girls and have for years is scavenger hunt. So I was writing scavenger hunt rhyme clues in between games today, and my wife gave me the heads up. Better get in front of this. So I did some of it earlier last week, but we finished it.
Is there a separate Twitter account that people can subscribe to for those?
For the scavenger hunt clues, they're right here. I mean, I got the list of scavenger hunt clues. I got to go get those hidden because she's going to want to do those first thing in the morning before school. I got to get Stealing Signals written during school. Then we got to go do, she wants to go to the arcade tomorrow. We got to go to the arcade after school. A lot of fun stuff. It's going to be a fun day. I'm making that sound like it's anything other than pure joy. It's going to be an awesome time. But because of that, I do need to try to get some sleep tonight. Having said that, I want to talk to you about the Jets before we get out of here relatively soon. Breece Hall, we see Braylon Allen. Last week, we didn't see Braylon Allen, and you talked about on the Thursday show, some of that had to do with the low play volume, or likely had to do with. We see Braylon Allen more in this game, and he looks good. He has the long touchdown run. He also takes a screen to the house, 2 touchdowns on 9 touches. Breece also scores a TD on the long reception and has 21 total touches, 8 targets, 7 receptions. His role looks fine overall. To me, the story was more that like the whole offense was built out of the 2 running backs in some ways. Disappointing day for Garrett Wilson. I thought of it because we're talking about Chris Olave's 6 targets and 4 catches. I knew that Wilson only had 6 and 4. At the same time, no other receiver or tight end had more than 4 targets or 2 receptions. It was just like the running backs. And I mean, is this just Aaron Rodgers still getting into the flow of things? I'm not like panicking about Garrett Wilson at this point, personally.
You're not.
What do you think? I'm not. No, I think it's like Rodgers getting into the flow of things. Like I said, they're not actually getting the ball to the receivers a ton yet. And he clearly had more volume than, the other wide receivers and tight ends and those things. It's not great though. But I'm curious what you're thinking. You sound like you are pretty concerned.
I didn't love it.
Yeah, no, I mean, it wasn't great. I would have liked 2 touchdowns.
One of the elements that I really thought we could see some mild differences with was just the pace and the willingness to attack and the willingness to sort of impose your will from the perspective of blowing teams out and feeling like you were a Super Bowl contender. There has been nothing that has happened in the first 2 weeks that gives you any sense that the Jets see themselves as Super Bowl contenders, in part because the results on the field have been so bad that like there was not any feedback that would be telling them Super Bowl contenders. And I know that Aaron Rodgers, likes to drain the clock, but today I had all of these Phillip Rivers flashbacks where I'm like, Phillip Rivers would be embarrassed about all of the delays of game that are happening. Every other play, the clock ticks down from 1 to 0, and Aaron Rodgers is acting like he's got 7 more seconds left. It happened over and over. The lack of preparation, the lack of actual, again, spark from Rodgers, that ability to dominate with his understanding of what's happening and his arm talent. I mean, where is the arm talent as it relates to getting the ball to Garrett Wilson, a guy that he's described as Devontae Adams? Because I've been a little bit skeptical of Devontae Adams, and I think that week 1 showed some of the concerns there. The Las Vegas Raiders with Gardner Minshew defeated the Baltimore Ravens today by relentlessly targeting their 2 stars and by actually making Devontae Adams look a little bit more like he's been in the past. And he dropped a touchdown in that game, right? And it could have been much bigger.
Wide open for that play. But he scored on the drive. He still ended up scoring. You're talking about the slant where he was like free and could have ran and scored? Right?
No, he dropped that one. He also dropped one where, I mean, it's not really a drop. It's more like if Devontae Adams is going to be, and again, I haven't watched it, but everybody loves bringing the show up to me and like his behavior on the show. It was one of those where it's sort of an underthrow because the defender is unsighted and the offensive guy going back, but he's falling into the end zone with the defender on and the ball is short. He gets his hands out, gets his fingertips on it. I mean, it just is a play that you feel like peak Devontae Adams would make in his sleep. Right.
I missed that. What's the show that everyone... You referenced the show, but I didn't hear what show.
The receiver show. I mean, everybody's like, show. Devontae Adams, like he's going to kill people. Be like, you are fading his target volume, which isn't going to happen because there will be deaths in the Raiders group if he doesn't get the targets. Whereas they're like, I'm concerned about George Kittle because George Kittle seems like the coolest guy on the planet. Fortunately, the coolest guy on the planet had a big game today. But working back through the Jets, I mean, Breece Hall looked fantastic. Ben, I did have my darkest moment of the day when he went to the tent. Fortunately, it seems like he's probably okay, although we had guys come back in last week and then not be available for week 2. Certainly, if you have Braylon Allen, who is going to be a big star from a backup perspective, you know, maybe if Breece Hall is dinged up, then...
I think I missed the whole Breece Hall injury. What happened?
Yeah, he's got a quad injury or something like that.
Okay.
It was one of the reasons why the first touchdown to Allen happened.
Okay.
The second one was more just that I do think that Allen's going to be a part of the offense. Yeah. So, you know, kind of working through those things. Both of those guys look good. Allen Lazard was terrible. There were some
That's the other stuff with Wilson
the tight ends today where they literally jumped less high than if they had just stood still, which I can understand because that's what happens when I jump. But it's not what you're hoping to your tight end targets for the New York Jets. I mean, the volume has got to come to Garrett Wilson, but the Jets just have to look a lot better, right? At some point, we have to stop making excuses for all of the contextual stuff with Garrett Wilson, and he's got to go make plays.
I agree with that completely. I'm not thrilled, but I do think the gap between him and the rest of the players is very apparent, and you're hitting on this, and I'm getting excited because this is part of my read on it the first couple of weeks as well, is that Rodgers hasn't looked like he's looked okay. I was saying last week that he looked good. I was surprised that he still had like the same arm strength and the same like ball placement on certain throws. He had a really nice throw today to Mike Williams on the sideline. He's still clearly Aaron Rodgers, but at the same time, he also has not played football for 2 full years. He didn't play last year, right? Like he got a few snaps in. And I think part of the like lackluster energy and all of that stuff is they started their first two games of the season on the road at San Francisco and at Tennessee. His season last year ended before it started. Like part of it's like, can we just get off to a little bit of a start here? Take some hits. He didn't play in the preseason at all. Take a couple hits. You know, he threw a pass away today where like he felt the defender coming around behind him and was about to hit him. And it was like, I just do not want to take this hit. And he just like threw it to nowhere. And he got an intentional grounding on it. But it was just clear, like it was the most like rookie rushed, I'm getting rid of this ball right now moment that I've seen from Rodgers in like several years. He's usually kind of cool in the pocket and willing to take hits. I think he's really just wanting to stay healthy right now, which it's a long season.
That makes sense. But I just think when you look at that staff that they have in place too, it's basically, this is Aaron Rodgers. If he's not going to be a star, then you also don't have a good coaching staff. You don't have any talent outside of Garrett Wilson in the passing game. So that makes it really easy for opposing defenses to at least, I say easy. I mean, hopefully he can still go make plays, but you think about the problem that it presents for him if he's dealing with gimmick defenses every week. I mean, maybe Mike Williams starts to play better. Maybe Malachi Corley starts to develop. They don't have anything at tight end. I mean, the catch that Breece Hall made was the best catch that they've had on the season. He continues to look very good in the receiving game. I think Braylon Allen is going to look decent there. They're going to get a lot of volume and value out of that. But then off of that, can they get other people involved? One of the things, as you were describing where Aaron Rodgers is right now, immediately my mind flashed to the final season from Tom Brady, where right now we are getting dramatically better play from Baker Mayfield as it relates to what it's going to do for those receivers than we got from Tom Brady in the last season. If your thesis for Garrett Wilson is that he could have one of those Devontae Adams types of years with Aaron Rodgers, it's not great to be thinking it'd be actually better if he were playing with Baker Mayfield.
Yeah, it's a fair point that it doesn't really look like that. I'm saying I think he's going to be fine, but like the really extreme upside scenarios where they're just on the same page and hitting constantly, we haven't seen enough of that. I will push back very minorly on the like the Breece Hall was the best catch of the year comment, because like Garrett had a nice play on his 26-yard catch today. He had a nice back shoulder catch in week 1. He's made a couple plays. You act like he hasn't done anything. Like he's made a couple plays in the first 2 games. It's not been to the extent that we'd like to see. But he's made a couple plays. A couple.
I thought we were going to get some Justin Jefferson type of action from it. I was thinking about, so the play today, Ben, that was so hilarious, I thought, was the Justin Jefferson long touchdown where he made some great moves, but also the 49ers defenders seemed to capitulate. It reminded me very much of that long touchdown from Kamara, where you're thinking, are the Dallas Cowboys defenders going to start running at any point? Because like they're not making any ground up on him. And was it your guy who comes? I'm thinking of the right play, right? Where Justin Jefferson's weaving all over the field. The defenders are weaving with him. And then out of nowhere, we get a blocker from the Vikings who's just like, if I had needed to make the tackle, I could have. I don't know what everybody else is doing, but I'm suddenly in this play now.
When everyone was showing that replay on Twitter, they were pointing out that the referee, if anyone gets to see this highlight again, pay attention to the referee, because the referee tracked the play and then had to back out of the way and move around the other way. And he was running faster than some of the defenders on the play. Yeah, Jefferson, a nice day today, although besides that 97-yard TD, only 3 other catches for 36 yards. He leaves in the third quarter with a thigh contusion. Doesn't sound like that's going to be long-term based on the immediate aftermath commentary, but they obviously need him. The Vikings looked really good up until that point with him. And then after he left, it started to get a little dangerous. Are you worried about the Niners at all? I'm a little bit concerned about the Niners without Christian McCaffrey. I just don't think this offense flows quite as well with like a traditional grinded out power runner in Jordan Mason. And then Purdy is less able to do, like, it's like harder to hide some of Purdy's deficiencies when he has to then be a drop back passer off of that, as opposed to like you have Christian McCaffrey and you can just move him around the formation and have him go run an option route against a linebacker, motion Debo into the backfield and use him as a runner. And you're doing all these multiple things where it's like all the quarterback has to do is just be a point guard at that point. I think it puts more stress on Purdy to not have Christian McCaffrey in the lineup. I don't think that's a particularly bold take, but it looked a little bit concerning to me. I mean, they lost. Again, also not a bold take, but are you at all concerned about them long term? I would say that I am a little bit.
In some ways, I'm kind of excited for what we could get, because I mean, from a fantasy perspective, what we really want is scoring. And I mean, Jordan Mason looked fantastic, right? I mean, he looked really, really good. And that doesn't always happen, right? One of the reasons why I bother to put out the 0 RB list, which doesn't mean that I get all of those right by any stretch, but the whole point is there's a difference between the backups who can go and be stars and the guys who, if the teams have to go to their backups, then they're going to be in trouble. The interesting thing that you know is just how Purdy played, and it's a reminder of how important the lack of mistakes is and how important the efficiency actually is if you want to dominate football games. You know, arguably it's a little bit apples and oranges, but the Kansas City Chiefs looked awful today, and we're very lucky to escape with a victory against the Bengals, where the Bengals are able to sucker them into just running the game away. And it's a little bit like the situation in San Francisco where Mason was still extremely effective, But the mistakes that Purdy made off of that put the 49ers in a lot of trouble. And correct me if I'm thinking about this wrong here, but this would have been a blowout if Aaron Jones doesn't fumble at the goal line.
No, that's right.
So, I mean, it's not even really that competitive a game, but it's a game in which we do get the scoring from Mason. We get the scoring from Debo. We get the scoring from George Kittle. Those are the things that I really want to see out of this 49ers offense. I don't know if it's because I think it's personally frustrating when people don't show up for their teammates, because this isn't an individual sport or an individual effort, and there aren't that many games in a football season. So when you are not available and ready to play well and you cost your team victories, it's not like you can be like, oh, we're going to play 162 games. We're going to play 80 games, right? I mean, these games matter. You have the Bengals losing in part because you don't get anything out of Jamar Chase and he commits a bad unsportsmanlike conduct penalty. We're not getting from the 49ers what they need from Brandon Ayuk. And I mean, that's a big difference, because it's not really just not having Christian McCaffrey. They don't have the full complement of weapons in the offense that they've had, which was the point that, you know, we continued to hammer last year when Purdy had this sort of borderline MVP season, which is that they've got historically great group of weapons when you have all four of those guys.
And they're down to 3. I do think Ayuk's going to wind up in a good spot. I was writing about him a little bit later in the week, in that I was kind of out on him because he only had 105 targets last year. They didn't really need to focus on him. But McCaffrey's not going to be a part of this offense for a long time. I do think they're going to have to go to Ayuk more. It's early. He hasn't been good. He also missed all of August. But I think they're going to need to get him. He's like their man beater. He's their best route runner. He's their guy that can go win one-on-one coverages. They're going to need to like call plays for, like, you don't have that option route that I was talking about in the offense anymore, because Jordan Mason is not splitting out in the slot and running that route. You can't go to the Christian McCaffrey thing there. So what do you go to instead? I think you wind up going to more Ayuk stuff in some spots. So I'm a little bit more excited about him than I personally was. I was down on him. But, you know, Debo has a huge role in this game today. 10 targets, 8 catches, 110 yards. You mentioned Kittle has a great game, 7 for 76 at a TD. Oh, excuse me. They do need more out of Ayuk. Mason looks great. I don't think the offense is going to be bad or anything. And yeah, shout out to Kevin O'Connell, man. Like he did a really good job and schemed up a great offensive day for Sam Darnold against a team that knows Sam Darnold well, you know, and knows that he's got some issues. Darnold does throw a pick at one point. But the Vikings get a big upset. Even despite that fumble you mentioned, they were up 20-7 and had the potential to go up basically 3 touchdowns, and he fumbles kind of going into the end zone or right outside the end zone on a short like screen pass from the 20, and he gains like 18 yards and fumbles right by the goal line. And the Niners go back and score TD and cut it to 6. No Jefferson, and the Vikings were able to answer that with a 14-play, 62-yard drive for a field goal to go back up 9 and end up, you know, pushing it to 2 scores and end up coasting to the victory from there. Good coaching. Good coaching wins games. Shanahan's a good coach as well, but Vikings are going to be better than I was anticipating. We talked about them a little this offseason, Sean. I think you were a little bit more interested in them than I was. They look good through 2 games. They had a blowout victory in New York in their first game. Hopefully Jefferson's fine. We get some Jalen Naylor in this game. He scores a TD, 4 targets, 3 catches, 54 and a TD. Not a great game or anything, but they didn't throw a ton. Yeah, I mean, the Vikings look interesting.
And this is more, say, dynasty related or later in the season related if you're in leagues with a lot of trading. I think that the offense has looked good enough and Darnold has looked good enough that if you are in position to be patient, so you've got your starting lineup really well taken care of. I mean, Ben, we saw just after 1 week that can already be tricky, where so many people hurt, inactive, what have you. But I mean, Jordan Addison is going to have a big season when he's healthy. And if it somehow doesn't happen this year, again, in dynasty leagues, he's going to have a monster career. He should be much, much, much higher than I think most people have him right now. Being tethered to that coaching staff is a fantastic situation to be in.
Absolutely. I mean, there really is a haves and have-nots thing right now. And I mean, I think it matters across the spectrum. If you're looking for bye week fill-ins or you have injuries, you're looking for a spot start, and you're trying to decide between a couple random names. I sometimes get asked, like, for whatever, some running back that wouldn't be rostered anywhere because a lot of times people don't have the running back points. They're who might get some touches. But particularly more for the wide receivers, I would say. If you're like, deeper league, you're looking for someone. I think that's a really important tiebreaker right now. Like a Jalen Naylor makes a lot of sense right now while Addison's out, or made sense from the perspective of, the offense is going to be functional, because some of these defenses, the ways they're playing things, like they can make offenses look non-functional at times, and there's just no passing at all. I mean, we talked about even some of the games where the teams are too efficient, like the Saints, there's no passing, but some of the teams that have been bad have just so few completions in the games as well. You don't want, a secondary wide receiver on a team that can't even throw the ball or can't, schematically find easy completions or those types of things. It's a problem even if that player's talented, which we were just talking about with like the Bears, for example. Caleb Williams plays a lot better in this game than week one, completes a lot more passes. We do get a little bit of volume out there to the guys, but there's some offenses out there that are even worse than that you would not necessarily want to be looking at those secondary players. And I think, the Jalen Naylors and those types. Jalen Tolbert has a good game. We know there's going to be volume there. That offense, even in a game where they get blown out, the Cowboys, is going to have passing volume in losses. Like that type of thinking, I think, can be very helpful.
So as we close up today, did you have any individual sort of one-off takeaways, things that you saw? I was interested to see if Stevenson would look good again in a tougher matchup. And even though they don't win, I thought that he looked good. Antonio Gibson was surprisingly good as well. We talked last week about Brian Thomas and the sort of toe tap that he did. I don't think that Andre Yoshivas is going to end up being anything, but he made a fantastic touchdown catch today where it was basically just laying fully horizontal, had both feet down, brings the ball in. I mean, if he doesn't show up for him in the red zone, then even with all the mistakes that the Chiefs made. Oh, and even though this was maybe certainly the worst I think Patrick Mahomes has ever played in a win, it was one of his worst NFL games today. We got a long touchdown from your guy that shows that maybe he won't be used exclusively underneath.
Yeah, you mentioned wanting to know some of my tweets. You a Happy Gilmore guy? Remember that movie a little bit? I tweeted that was the Happy learned how to putt moment. There's the whole movie he can't putt, but there's a moment where he goes, Happy learned how to putt. That was if he can win on a vertical route. I mean, apparently he was undraftable because he's a gimmick underneath low A-dot slot receiver that can't do anything, despite the fact that in that role he was very good once he got into a full snap role late and in the playoffs, because he adds yak and he gets so much volume in that role. And the way that I talked about this offseason was, what if the rest of it develops? Well, we just saw in week 2, they're like, defenses are not bringing safeties over the top of Rice. They're bringing them over the top of Worthy and everyone else. Well, we're going to put Rice out wide and one-on-one and let him fake a little inside move and win on a vertical route. And he just wins. And you're like, wow, why didn't the defense think of that? Like why didn't I think that they were going to be doing that? Because obviously the defense is thinking they're just going to go one-on-one on Rashee Rice. He never runs a route past 10 yards. And then he just burns this dude and wins for 40-yard TD.
So fast and so smooth.
I think it was Barnwell who tweeted it out. The first Patrick Mahomes passing touchdown that traveled at least 40 air yards since 2021. Or the way he wrote it was, he now has more passing touchdowns that have traveled more than 40 air yards in 2024, one, than he had in all of 2022 and 2023 combined, which is crazy. The last 2 years, he has not had a long, because he used to have those every week when Tyreek,
and yet it was still an incredibly depressing game. When they put Hollywood on IR, you're thinking this is going to be great for Xavier Worthy. It's going to be great for Rashee Rice. It opens things back up for Travis Kelce a little bit. What we got 1 week, well, I mean, obviously it's been 2 weeks. It doesn't really seem like Hollywood is going to ever play for them. But it was just an extra helping of Isaiah Pacheco with a little Carson Steele thrown in.
But Pacheco got hurt late. I don't know if you noticed that. And the reporting is that it's like pretty bad. He's going to miss a significant amount of time, it sounds like. Or at least that's. They're talking about him being in the locker room after the game, towel over his head, very emotional, had a boot on. And then I just heard some rumblings that it's, they're worried that it's going to be, I don't know how bad, but like that there may be something broken or something. And it could be like a month or more. So I don't know what they're going to do there. That's an interesting question because Pacheco, they've been using him a ton. They haven't even really used P. Ryan. I think there's people that are like, well, hope you got P. Ryan. And I've been giving you crap that we didn't have P. Ryan on that team, but they haven't used him a ton. They used him a little bit after Pacheco went out. They were using Steele before him in this game, but Steele loses a fumble. Don't know that they're necessarily going to rely on him as their lead back. CEH is still on IR, but like eventually I think when he comes back, if he's ready to, that he might be that guy. I was wondering.
There's a novel solution to all of this, though, is that you have the greatest player in the NFL.
Throw the ball every time.
Use him.
Yeah.
I mean, every game, it's going to be more and more of this will let you run the ball effectively because you don't want Patrick Mahomes to throw it. Yeah, I hope that Isaiah Pacheco is okay. Obviously, he's someone that I've been frustrated by the lack of dynamism, but hearts go out to anybody who suffers injuries in the games. It's really hard for us as fantasy managers when you lose somebody and you can take that times 10 or 100 or 1,000 when you're thinking about the person themselves. We've seen it dramatically change the course of so many careers, and that's really tough to hear. Sorry, that's the case.
Yeah, that's a bummer. You asked about some specific takes. I was just going through my notes a little bit. I absolutely loved what we saw from Neighbors today. I think the rookie stuff, obviously, that we led with. Somebody in the chat was asking, they wanted to hear you talk about Bowers. We talked about it right from the jump. You must not have heard the top of the show, but if you're still in the chat, go listen to the top. We got Sean's takes right at the beginning of the show. I thought Neighbors looked incredible. I thought it was what we thought from – you talked – when we talked about Marvin Harrison about maybe not enough volume. He only ends up with the 4 targets, even though he has his eruption game. And I think that's like we saw the difference there. You haven't gotten a chance to watch the Giants game yet, but I already mentioned to you the 18 targets. It was Neighbors' offense today for the Giants. That was
this is one of those things that Ben maybe isn't always fair, doesn't always make sense. But when we saw how good Brian Thomas was last week, one of the things that was also running through my mind is that we have plenty of not really circumstantial evidence, but just evidence to suggest that he's just a shadow of what Malik Neighbors is. I mean, imagine what that is going to eventually look like.
And the chat just asked if we talked Jacksonville yet. We have not, but Sean has not watched that game yet. There's a couple games always that we don't have an opportunity to necessarily dig into on the show because he's watching games individually throughout the day. He does an incredible job of getting through almost all of them, but you wouldn't have a whole lot of takes on a game that you hadn't seen yet. Neighbors is another one that you hadn't seen. Another one that you haven't seen, I'm going to give you some more positive news because I like to spoil things for you. I'm a good friend. That's actually really mean, but this is a great one. J.K. Dobbins looked awesome again. I just it's the coolest story so far. You'll get an opportunity to watch the Chargers later, but he looked bursty again early. He made a really cool play later. I'm not going to describe it or anything, but that was a really fun one. And I'm like, I wrote about him in Stealing Signals last week somewhat favorably. My old CBS colleague, Chris Towers, last week during the week, I think on Monday, while I was working on Stealing Signals, tagged me in what I had written about James Robinson a couple years ago. ETN's second season, Robinson's year after his Achilles where he like looked good early. He had a couple long TDs, but the burst, like the long speed wasn't there. And he was kind of referencing how Dobbins' long speed wasn't there. But it was interesting as I wrote that or read what I wrote then, which ended up being very accurate, fortunately. I was talking about how other than like a long touchdown in that game, he had rushed like 22 times for 27 yards or something. And he ended up with like a 23 for, 70 day because he had like a 50-yard run. But the rest of it was like there was nothing to it. And he had ETN behind him as well as a real threat, this former first-round pick. The Dobbins stuff from last week that was different was that his success rate was actually really strong in addition to the long run where he didn't show the long speed, but the evasiveness and the burstiness and the explosiveness was actually there down to down throughout his day last week. Felt like it was there again this week. Really excited for Dobbins, just like going forward generally. You haven't gotten a chance to watch that, but
when I did get a chance to see last week's game, so this is actually a team that I haven't watched before the show either time.
That's right.
It was fun. And I was surprised you're always a little bit surprised at how slow he is now, but how fluid he was despite being slow. And then one of the things that he had really talked up heading into the season was how good their offensive line was and how strong he felt like his rapport already was with them. And I mean, he had a play last week that was just masterful in terms of following the block and then getting into space, making the cut, getting to the next level. And you watch some of these guys. One of the concerns I have for, Bucky Irving is just because he is small and not fast. It's like you can get into space and then like, are you going to do anything with it? It's like you're going to be night and day better than Rashad White, but is that going to matter?
Right.
I mean, J.K. Dobbins over and over, he just has this ability to, even though he's been fortunate to play on teams that do have good offensive lines, and in the case with the Ravens, you obviously have to account for Lamar Jackson, but his ability to consistently get to the second level, make a guy miss at the second level, even in the times when he's limited with injuries, the averages, because he can consistently do that in a way that almost no one else can. It's exciting to hear that he looked good again today.
I love this from Justin in the chat. When I pass him on the hallway and I have to sidestep, I say Dobbins like when you say Kobe and throw something in the trash bin. That's what I mean. He's just really good in at that type of thing. That's a great quote. We got I've seen this a few times in the chat. The JSN with the money bags on the S. I like that as well. The other guy that we didn't talk about, I wanted to ask you because I thought I saw that he had an injury. Did Marshawn Lloyd get hurt again today?
I do not know. The way I watched that one, I did not see him go off injured, but
he looked kind of fun on one of his early carries. But then I saw
the play that got called back. He looked fantastic. It was called back.
Okay.
The plays that were not called back, he looked pretty average.
Okay. I only saw him touch the ball once, and it was like a 20-yard gain. And then I looked at the box score later, and his long play was 5 yards. And I was like, am I hallucinating? But okay, it got called back. He looked really cool on the play that got called back. And then I thought I saw that he like re-injured himself. So yeah, anyway, it was just fun to see him look good for a play that didn't count. That's all.
Well, when we think about the Packers, I thought that this isn't something where you're going to say, okay, Christian Watson is a bust because again, they just didn't throw the ball at all. So we don't really know, but within the context of the game that they didn't throw the ball, Reed looked good again, but also Dontavian Wicks looked good. And also when they needed a big play, including one that was down the field, Romeo Doubs made that play. We continue to get more evidence that I just think that this offense is going to score at will when they have Jordan Love back.
There you go.
And again, there's Tucker Kraft. So
Tucker Kraft. All right. Yeah, that's all I got. You got any other big takes?
I think those were the big ones there, kind of working through that Chiefs Bengals game. Very, very choppy. You would love to see a game between the two, hopefully good teams be better. I think it was this is obvious in many ways because they sprung the upset, but today's performance from Gardner Minshew leads you to believe that they're going to be able to get volume to the two playmakers, and they're not going to be able to run the ball, and their defense, I mean, Max Crosby was wrecking what Baltimore was trying to do play after play after play. I mean, we don't talk a ton about defense, and I don't know for sure. I mean, as many of the listeners will know, grew up in Kansas City. I've been to Arrowhead many times. I know that Derek Thomas had one of the all-time great sack performances. Aiden Hutchinson with the Lions was on pace to, he had like 3 sacks in the first quarter. They allowed Chris Godwin to put up like 100 yards in the first half, despite the fact that every other play Hutchinson was sacking Baker Mayfield. We had that with the Raiders defense. The Raiders, as I think that you pointed out with the coaching staff there, they're going to be a competitive team, and a competitive team that can't run the ball. You're not going to play Gardner Minshew himself in fantasy, but that team is going to end up being fun, which is what we hoped, because that's a team where you go in and you're like, the thing I'm concerned about here is they just will, be 3 and out every time. And I don't think that's going to be the case. They're going to win some more games.
Yep. That looks fantastic. In the chat, Steve said Gretchen needs some pins in the corkboard behind him. A couple other people let him know that it's a window. Let's get late for everybody, Sean. Did you have one of the teams that we didn't talk about at all was the Rams? Did you have any like key thoughts on them? I was kind of looking through trying to see if there's anyone that.
Well, I thought that Kyron Williams showed off a little bit of the thesis for him, even in a game where they get annihilated. So that's like maybe very, very vaguely encouraging. At one point, the commentators in the Titans game compared Will Levis to Matthew Stafford, and my head almost exploded. But then I watched the Rams play, and I'm like, well, maybe now. I mean, what's happening?
But then I watched the Rams play. Oh, that's fantastic.
That was kind of demoralizing. What's the report on Cooper Kupp as we?
I don't know. He was in a walking boot. He did re-enter the game, but obviously, that can be adrenaline and all that. I thought it was interesting that he wasn't doubtful coming out of the half, but he was doubtful after the Cardinals scored on their first possession of the second half. So he came back in the game after the injury for the 4th down play right before half. It was 24-3 to try to make it 24-10. They did not convert. And then the Cardinals came out and scored on the first drive, made it 31-3. And then immediately after that, he was reported as doubtful. And I took that as a favorable sign. I was like, well, he's running back on the field. But then I did see some of the Twitter doctors saying like the mechanism could be high ankle sprain. So maybe he'll be out for weeks. I don't know. I'm hoping that it's not that bad, but it's not clear.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the other thing I would throw out there as we finish is that this was the second consecutive game where I thought the Texans' game plan was awful. The game was much more competitive than it had any right to be. Nico Collins is superhuman.
It's good.
Tank Dell played really poorly tonight, which I was surprised and disappointed by.
Tough
CJ
drop.
Stroud had a throw, I think, at 12:30 in the second quarter. That was one of those all-time great throws. Other than that, he didn't play that well. Their running game, I was really excited about the running game, even knowing that it was mostly matchup based last week. It's potentially going to be an abject disaster in a situation where they lean on it way too much. And so you're going to need to get, so one of the things you mentioned last week was that Diggs was open down the field some, and he just didn't draw those targets in week 1. He did draw some down the field targets today. He caught one. And it's, again, a reminder that, what you want as a fantasy manager is the points, right? Because it was not a good fantasy day for him.
No.
I really want to see the Texans look much, much better in week 3, because I think that low key, that's been one of the biggest disappointments, right? They're 2-0. They're fine. Their defense looks good. Stroud's made some big throws. Nico Collins looks unreal. And yet, they should look a lot better. Tank Dell should be playing better. They need to get the ball to Diggs. They need to throw the ball
I had them
I want the
-6.
season to be fun, right? And this has not been fun.
I think Rupesh makes a good point. The Bears defense might be legit. I had them -6 because I was confident that their scheme would be that much better than, Waldron on the road after, kind of laying an egg in week 1 at home. The Bears weren't going to be very good. I pushed that bet. I feel like I definitely should have won that bet. But the Texans could not cover the 6 in the end.
Well, that's another one where a team seems to have a huge lead, right? But because you fumble at the goal line, suddenly the game is back in doubt. Just blow the opponent out.
Yeah. Not great. That's right. Cam Akers' fumble at the goal line was not good in that one either. Yeah, I think that's it. Unless you got more takes up your sleeve. We gotta get you out of here. We know you have some things to hide or clues to write, or that's right. Clues to hide. And then I got to get some sleep because I got to do the clues in the morning. And then I got to write. I might try to start signals tonight, which I've never really done, but I've never really had her birthday land on a Monday. So it's game time.
It is. This has been a blast. Thank you to everyone who joined us. Really appreciate everyone who has left a like. Please click your notifications so when Ben goes live this week, next week, all of those times you will know. Subscribe, all of those things help grow the channel. If you missed parts of it and you prefer to listen to it on the podcast, it will be on RotoViz Radio, and Ben will be back for a RotoViz Radio show later on in the week. Good luck to everybody tomorrow night as you try and take those week 2 fantasy matchups. Hope.
See ya.